Our next speaker will tell us how to get the most out of your content marketing strategy. He is Greg Keebing, Director of Sales and Operations for Hangar 12. Greg, take it away.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Hope everybody is still doing good. Looking forward to sharing out this last presentation with you guys. So a little bit about me. I'm from the suburbs of Chicago, Naperville, Illinois. I'm a huge Chicago sports fan, Cubs, Blackhawks, Bears, Bulls. So hope everybody's been enjoying the Michael Jordan documentary as much as I have. But I attended the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and studied supply chain and marketing at their school of business, and then moved up to Minnesota for work. I spent a couple years with Coca-Cola and then Ecolab, which is a large chemical manufacturer doing a lot of business analytics and project management. And worked on my Six Sigma Green Belt and MBA there. And then a few years ago, I decided to come back into the fold and join the family business. So that is Hangar 12, our digital marketing agency that's been in the family for a couple decades now. And I've just had the pleasure of working alongside my dad for the last few years, predominantly in the CPG space. So one thing that we've worked a lot on is our content marketing strategy for our clients. So I'm hoping that today what you'll be able to take out of this is the ability to really narrow in on and identify your content niche and understand how to align the right assets with the right audience at the right time. And a lot of that's going to come from this content cornerstones and content cobblestones framework. So we'll talk more about what that means later on, but really we want to focus on how can you get the most out of your content, repurpose it, stretch it out, and make sure you're being cost effective while also realizing maximum gains in how you position your content strategy. So the good news is that this is going to be applicable whether you're B2B or B2C, an agency or a brand. This really should be something that helps you understand how content works across the sales funnel and the consumer journey. So the first question, and ultimately the biggest one, is what's your content niche? Truly every single one of you is an expert in something. People definitely don't give themselves enough credit about what they are subject matter experts in. And this is a perfect example of that, where everybody has some sort of specific knowledge, and every brand or firm has some sort of competitive advantage. I don't care if you're a commodity even, you have something that sets you apart. So for instance, we have a frozen fruit branded client. Typically you don't see much variation between these types of farms. Well, we had the opportunity to go out and tour their facility, and it turns out this mom and pop company had invested in state-of-the-art laser technology that sorts out damaged fruit at a significantly higher rate than typical supply chain machinery. So that's differentiation right there. They have higher quality fruit than their competitors. So don't sell yourself short in what you offer. And the biggest part of this is identifying it. So some questions you can ask here are, how do you articulate your differentiating value, or what sets you apart when you're talking to prospects or retailers or consumers? What does your brand offer that competitors don't? Or more generally, what are you most knowledgeable about? And this should help reveal your content niche, which ultimately reveals your cornerstone. When I say the word cornerstone, sometimes people think of the pinnacle or kind of the fancy aesthetic, and that's actually not the case. The cornerstone is foundational. It's the core element, the value that supports everything else. And that's what your content niche is. That's your cornerstone. So what are some examples of vehicles to deliver cornerstone content? You see a few listed here on the left, and we'll kind of talk through these, and some visual examples on the right. So one would be a weekly blog. You see Hangar 12's Consumer Talk there. That's a CPG Insights blog that we publish on a weekly basis for the benefit of our clients and other consumers in the industry. Podcasts are an ever-growing popular vehicle for cornerstone content. I'm sure a lot of you have some favorites there, both in the business world as well as outside of that in the more personal space. And then Long-form videos are super popular. You can see we have our client Frigo Cheese there on the right. We produce recipe videos for them so consumers can better understand how to use our product and in what ways they can try it out that might be different or new or innovative for them. And then we have things like long-form articles, research. I've got the fantasy footballers up there. That's a popular one that I subscribe to, where they have statistics out there and all sorts of strategy and research that you can dig into that they're offering as content for people to go consume and added value for them to understand what they do differently that might attract you. There's webinars. Don't need to go into that one too deeply. You're on one right now. And then, it can be specific to who your consumer is. So this could be activities and games if you have a younger demographic. So if you go to lego.com, you'll see a shop zone and then a play zone, which I've got a picture of up there, right, where there's games and videos and all sorts of content for kids to digest so they can better interact with the brand and grow that brand affinity. And if you look at this and say, this looks really time intensive or capital intensive and I don't have time to do it, it really just depends on what you prioritize. If you make developing these content cornerstones and putting a solid vehicle behind it a priority, you're going to find this isn't nearly as taxing as it looks at first. And you're going to start positioning yourself as an expert in your field that people come to find out information and seek you out. So this is just an example for Hangar 12, a little bit about how we not only talk the talk, but also walk the walk. Something we feel sets us apart is our time to market or speed to market. So you can see on the left-hand side there's a little bit of a long-form article on our website under our approach that talks about how we as a digital remote agency are able to be a little bit more flexible, a little bit more efficient than more traditional agencies and our competitors because of how we operate. And on the right there's a podcast appearance from me. That's just a simple 30-minute podcast where I'm on there as the Marketing Agency Leadership Podcast talking about who Hangar 12 is, what we do differently, kind of what sets us apart in the time to market space. And it's not a perfect example there because it's not my podcast, right? I'm appearing on someone else's. So you have a little bit less control over those types of instances. But nonetheless, it's a 30-minute media piece that can serve as a pillar for some of the Cobblestone content down the road, which we'll talk about here shortly. So let's say you've identified your niche. You are working on developing Cornerstone content. What comes next? This is where you start to layer on the cobblestones. So again, for the sake of this illustration, I'm kind of treating Cornerstone as those foundational elements, that core value that draws your consumers in. And the cobblestones are more of a sample, an enticing element that brings people into what you do, and draws them in and pushes them towards those foundational pieces of content. So I wouldn't even refer to them as building blocks as much as I would call these aesthetic blocks. So Cobblestone content should give consumers a sample of your content. It should be succinct and have enticing copy and visuals that draws them in. There should be some sort of call to action or a click through here for the full experience. And ultimately, again, pointing to the cornerstone, pointing to the differentiating value that separates you from other product or service providers. So I say it's not about bait and switch, it's really about bait and serve. How can you draw people into an experience that they're going to keep coming back to the well and seeking out your product? So what are some examples of vehicles to deliver Cobblestone content? I'm sure almost everybody on this call is familiar with a lot of these, the list on the left-hand side. Social media posts are a huge one. So this is tweets, Instagram stories, LinkedIn posts are a huge element of this. I have my friend Lori Hyvee up there as an example where she's talking about a lunch and learn opportunity and has a short video about her podcast at Keystone Click that you can click to get a sample of, and that's a LinkedIn post right there. So that's kind of an element of social media posts and short form video right there. GIFs and static images continue to be huge, especially on platforms like Twitter. You see tips and checklists quite often. So there's an example on the right with HubSpot, quick 8-minute read in their sales portfolio, 81 one-sentence sales tips every rep should know. Right? That's just kind of a quick sample that draws you in. Maybe you get some immediate value out of that, and you're going to keep going back to HubSpot to learn more about some of those sales strategies. And then lunch and learns are a huge one too. Right? So an example at the bottom there from an email I just received about the Selling Boldly Happy Hour. It's a quick 20-minute webinar that you can attend, get a sample of some of these sales strategies, and then ultimately you're going to be served with more of the Cornerstone content, whether that's an ebook or a long-form seminar. That's kind of what's waiting for you in the foundational side of it. So again, to kind of show that we walk the walk here, you see Hanger 12 on the left-hand side with the LinkedIn post of ours. That's a 2-minute clip from that 30-minute podcast I did. So there's just some audio wave visuals there, and then it's captioned. So as you're scrolling by, you can read it or watch it. And that's drawing you in and directing you more to learn about how time to market sets us apart. Click here for the listen to the full podcast. Click through to visit our website. You see a 30-second video on the right-hand side articulating how accelerating your speed to market is beneficial and how that works for us as an agency. So that's just a 30-second sample that kind of entices you, maybe interests you, and now you're going to click through and learn more and visit the website and learn more and draw you into the Cornerstone. Let's talk about this purely from a content perspective. So if you are thinking about what a piece of Cornerstone content looks like, this is a great example. So Vanderhagen is a shave brand that we've worked with. They really feel that their shave regimen of 5 or 6 products sets them apart and is their cornerstone element. If you follow this regimen, use these 5 products in the right order, it's really going to create the best shave experience possible. So we created a long-form, 43-second video that highlights how that regimen fits together. We're promoting that across all these different channels on social media and the website, et cetera. But then we're able to repurpose that 43-second clip into a lot of micro content. So we have created a truncated version that's a 24-second spot in the middle there that shows the shave regimen products. There's a quick 6-second pre-roll ad for YouTube on shaving shouldn't be dull that highlights the butterfly razor and the shave butter. So we're able to kind of repurpose that content in a more micro format and use that across different mediums like YouTube. And then we can take a lot of that work and splice it into nano content like static images or GIFs that highlight specific products in the regimen, like the post-shave soothing balm or the self-heating shave cream. And we can create Twitter posts, Instagram stories that really entice people and they want to click and learn more about the product. So this is just a good example of how this framework can apply in terms of repurposing content and getting the most out of a single content investment. So what's another good brand example of this? I think Progressive is a great one and probably one that most people are very familiar with. So Progressive's Cornerstone content, or what they feel differentiates them and sets them apart, is their Name Your Price tool. They use this to show how you can do some price matching on policies. They can be flexible with how they package and price different insurance policies. But how do they communicate this? How do they translate it and draw people in to explore it a little more? The answer is their character of Flo, who I'm sure almost everyone's familiar with. And that's really their Cobblestone, is Flo and how she is represented across a multitude of different media channels. So you've seen commercials on cable and connected TV, social media posts, YouTube videos. And what's amazing about this framework is that it debuted in 2008, the Name Your Price tool and the character flow. So she's appeared in over 100 commercials, literally thousands of pieces of content that they've gotten out of this just through consistency and sticking with this framework and using Flow as a vehicle to familiarize consumers with the Name Your Price tool. So the question is, are you getting the most out of your content? I truly believe that this type of framework will make you significantly more cost effective. There's a few reasons for that. It's less capital investment in ongoing content development. So you are going to be able to utilize a single photo, video shoot, whatever it is, over an extended period of time if you're looking at it this way. And you're going to stretch that content lifecycle out significantly more than you otherwise would if you were constantly shifting or pivoting what your content should be and doing new shoots and new core elements that don't really express what an expert you are in the field. And ultimately, you can repurpose a lot of this across different channels. So the beauty of building out different pieces of content from a single pillar piece of content is that can be shifted and moved around and spliced and put together in a lot of different ways and then stretched across all sorts of different mediums, whether that's LinkedIn or Twitter, Instagram, or even outside of social media on the video side. These are things that can be highlighted on your brand website and with consumer engagement. But as with anything, there are downsides to it. So ultimately, you're going to have less flexibility to pivot. So if something instrumentally changes about your industry or your company, obviously what you've already kind of put into your Cornerstone content is solid, right? That's already there. So it's going to be difficult to go back and alter those things and may require a new direction on the Cornerstone. And that leads to the second point there of that's where you really need to nail the Cornerstone content. So I'll talk a lot about test and learn methodology. I think there's different ways to do this where you can ask current customers, what is your differentiating value? What do they most value about you? Consumer surveys are huge. Engagement rates on social posts are a good validation technique for making sure your Cornerstone content is legit and resonates with your consumers. And then the last downside is just fiscal, right? That the capital is going to hit up front. You're going to cut the check to develop these Cornerstone elements, whether that's video or podcast or something like that. And it's going to depreciate over time. So as you continue to get in a rhythm and get content lifecycle out of that, you're going to realize those cost gains the longer you can stretch it out. And ultimately, this same framework can be applied to the sales funnel. So when we think about Cornerstone content, that's awareness. You see in the funnel here, awareness, consideration, engagement, or conversion as you might typically see it. But awareness is really Cornerstone. That's the introduction to your product or service, whether that's through blog posts or video series or a podcast. That's how people find out who you are, what you offer, and why there's serious value to that's going to keep them coming back to your product. Ultimately, you can bring people in through those mediums and generate leads in the consideration bucket. So again, things like checklists, articles, having gated content, which could be research or ebooks or something like that, and a lunch and learn where people are registering and want to talk to you. This is a way to generate leads from the Cornerstone. And finally, you can take that a step further and incentivize sales through this, where you do something like a free consultation, or you have a discounted offering, or maybe even deeper research like annual benchmarks or something to that effect, where it's really going to start to entice people and want them to, again, just keep coming back to you to understand this Cornerstone value that you bring, and they're going to want to pay for that and work with you and build a relationship over time. So finally, as I think about this, there are some important elements here. I mentioned that test and learn methodology. I think it's of the utmost importance to test it figure out, again, does your niche, resonate with your consumer? Is that just a self-perceived thing that you think differentiates you, but then when you talk to consumers, that's not actually the case? And maybe consumers see something in your product or service that you otherwise didn't, that sets you apart. So you really have to figure out what that is, spend the time to nail the foundation, tweak it if you have to, come up with the right alterations to make sure that you are getting those engagement levels. But then the biggest part for me is sticking to it. So we talked about Progressive, implemented the Name Your Price tool and flow in 2008. They've been doing that for over a decade. So consistency is key. They are truly sticking to that framework and methodology, and now they have equity in what they've created there with those differentiators. So it takes time to build that, and if you're changing your Cornerstone content, right, every month, every 3 months or 6 months, you're not building equity. You're not establishing yourself as a subject matter expert in the field if you say you're an expert in everything, or you're constantly changing what it is about you that sets you apart. So there is an element to this that requires a deep level of consistency and seeing the gains over time. So with that, I will open it up to any questions about this Cornerstone Cobblestone framework.
Sure, we've got a few questions, Greg. One, has anything changed for this framework as the result of COVID-19?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the messaging has shifted a little bit, obviously, but the cornerstones remain. So if we're talking about Progressive, like we were in that example, they have new commercials with Flo and other characters where they're interacting on Zoom and kind of highlighting the pitfalls of remote work, but they really aren't changing the Name Your Price tool. They're not changing anything about the value that they provide to their customers and what it is that draws people in. So they're adapting, they're being smart about how they talk about current issues, but they're still relying on that same framework, even in times of dramatic change in the industry.
Okay, another question. How frequently should Cornerstone content be published?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I think it depends a little bit on where you're at. If you're talking about some of these more low-cost initiatives like a blog, that really needs to be weekly. You need to be talking about why you're an expert in the field and what value you can provide to consumers on a regular basis so that they know they're getting the most out of this. Now, when you look at something that's a little bit more time-intensive to create, like a video series or podcasting, I think that can be done potentially on a monthly basis. But it is important to stay top of mind in consumers' heads and perceptions, and that requires a more frequent publication than probably people are used to.
Okay, one last question. Does one vehicle or media channel work better than others?
Yeah, so as an agency, we're seeing video dramatically outperform other channels, but again, obviously this is a little more time and capital intensive, and if you have high production value in your videos, there's going to be more engagement because it's just a cleaner, more enticing medium. So as always, I would say, if possible, I think video is a phenomenal way to go, but it does need to be structured and produced at a high level.
Okay, one question that just came in. What new trends or channels do you think will be most effective in the future?
Yeah, I mentioned it a couple times, and I think it's one that's growing in the business space, but podcasting is absolutely taking off and taking the place of traditional audio mediums like radio. So podcasts now are widely available on streaming services like Spotify. I think it's something Joe Rogan just got $100 million to flip over to Spotify from YouTube or something like that. But podcasts are a great way to position yourself as a subject matter expert, and you can be super niche with it, because what's amazing is that with podcasting, like, your audience is just going to find you. So for instance, like my appearance on the marketing agency leadership podcast, they get a huge diverse group of individuals that will come on for interviews and participate, and it's really this endless cycle of content and expertise that's an outflow of that. So I think podcasting is underrated. It's shockingly cheap to produce. You can create good audio quality for not much money at all with a good mic and a good setup. So I think that's one that's kind of on the cutting edge in terms of a channel that's going to be very effective and frankly cost efficient going forward.
Okay, excellent. For any more questions or more information on this topic, you can reach out to Greg directly. His contact information is on the screen, email, and phone. Thank you, Greg. That was very, very interesting. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.